did rum runners use boats built by Higgins Industries during Prohibition?
Well, Andrew Jackson Higgins started his company. He had some. His company didn't do that great at first, but he developed a boat. It was first called a Wonder Boat, and then it would work in these areas where trappers and oystermen and also the oil industry could work. So they could operate in these areas that and wouldn't get choked with seaweed, etc., and could land up on sandbars and then retract. With the Eureka, which eventually really develops into that famous Higgins boat with the landing craft of World War II, he eliminated some problems so that there had been a problem with in those areas that the way they kept the propeller from getting tangled, they put it in a tunnel, which caused aerated water to get in there, which cut down on power. So the Eureka, which is why they call it the Eureka, was able to eliminate that, and so full power these guys would go in. So the Coast Guard, he's not only in those restricted waters, but he also was such a great engineer, he could build very fast boats. So the Coast Guard is going to him and asking him, it's Prohibition, we got rum runners, so we start selling them boats. So he gets the bright idea, well, I ought to let these rum runners know that maybe they could use some boats too. So then he starts making boats for both the rum runners and the Coast Guard.
And this leads to some innovations, as I recall, on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that he could make these boats very fast. In World War II, beyond just those Eureka landing craft, he built troop transports. He built the fastest PT boat the Navy had. It's like a 70-foot PT boat that would do 40 knots with very good gas mileage. And he just built this array of things, and a lot of it comes out of what he learned in working with those boats in Prohibition and in the swamps.
Okay. You kind of answered two of my questions at once. I'm going to skip down to another one here. What was the favorite craft of both the rum runners and the government agents? Was it the Eureka?
Well, the rum running always sort of operated on different levels. Or different stages, I guess you could say. You've got the 3-mile limit. Territorial waters, which then later was pushed to 12 miles. You had these enormous ships come with lots and lots of rum, and then you had these very fast boats go out and pick them up. So you had the fast boats, but then when they got in, of course, around Louisiana, there's all these swamps, there's all these restricted waters, and so what do? You can't just go to shore and drop it off. You have to navigate. And oftentimes the rum runners would just take to a point that was close to the swamps and just drop the stuff in the water, some prearranged spot. And this is why a lot of the people during Prohibition looked to see if the labels on the booze was damaged by water, because they didn't want people putting industrial alcohol and water and food coloring, which a lot of people did. So both the Coast Guard and the rum runners had to use both types of vessels in order to get it all the way into the drinkers.
Okay. Do you know of any examples of people who were involved on either side of that who later piloted these boats during the war?
I don't know any personal examples. I know that Higgins actually had a very large, during the war, school for coxsmen and people to learn how to operate his boats, because there was a particular technique. Most of the time, if you're riding a boat and you hit a sandbar, your natural instinct is to pull back. Well, he wanted them full speed ahead to keep going. And he used to demonstrate his boats in Lake Pontchartrain, you know, those cement steps. He would run those Eureka boats up onto the cement steps, full speed, and then back out to show how durable they were, to show their ability to go both onshore and then to pull away from that. So there were no other boats that the Navy came up with that could do this. I mean, he fought with the Bureau of Ships, appropriately named BS of the Navy, that all the time. I mean, they wanted their designs, and he was an engineering genius, not just designing boats, but also in production, which eventually during the war, he's producing everything from all these different kinds of boats, even planes, even he developed a lifeboat that B-17s would drop into the water for downed pilots. I mean, they'd tell him a problem and he would fix it. I mean, they won't give him contracts. Every time there's a test, he outperforms all of them, and they won't give him a contract. Eventually, the British start buying his boats. Then he starts using those British boats for the test runs. Truman, who's running this investigative committee on defense funding, looks into this and starts saying, "You got to give this guy contracts." I mean, he's outperforming everybody. So. I forgot your original question now.
I want to follow this up, actually. Who was refusing to do this? Was it the Pentagon?
Well, it was the Navy Bureau of Ships, Bureau of Construction and Shipping. It was these guys. It was the bureaucracy of the Navy who wanted their designs rather than some guy down in New Orleans showing them. And eventually, when the interest with the British and they start using this, they find out, they do these tests, and some of these high brass, and then with Truman saying, you have to give this guy a head-to-head test, and the brass look at this and they see that it outperforms. Not only that, it's half the price of what they're paying. And they ask him how he does it, and he says, well, I tell the British I'll do it for 10% above my costs, with the stipulation that there's no specifications, because the Navy would come in and give you specifications, like the Higgins boats. They wanted it 30 feet, and he kept telling them that's too short for the beam. It needs to be longer. And he's just so hard-headed that he just eventually gets his way because it's right. But he told them, you know, I can't produce at this price if you keep giving me specifications that you want. You know, I'll design a boat faster and better and cheaper than anybody you can find, which he did over and over and over again.
So it's really Truman that
gets
him the deal.
His subcommittee, investigating these things, and you know, Truman, after being in World War I, saw all the waste after World War I and all the defense contracts that were inflated, and he figured out, you know, all of a sudden you're just spending so much money on defense. We need to be watching this as it begins, not after it's over.
Mm-hmm. Was Higgins pretty much the sole designer of these things, or did you have anybody else?
He was, as I said, he's an engineering genius, but he was somebody who always brought people in and looked at their designs. He had his sons work with him. He had other engineers, and he would, you know, he was not opposed to other people's designs. If he saw somebody was smart, he'd take their ideas and incorporate them. And there were a lot of engineers that he gathered around him.
Now, you were in the Navy much later. Could you still perceive his influence at the time, or?
Well, yeah, I don't think you can avoid it in the Navy. There's so much of his D-Day. There's over 1,500 ships in D-Day that are Higgins boats of all kinds. I mean, tank landing craft, personnel landing craft, troop ships, PT boats, whatever you can think of. He designed, and designed well. So when I was in the Navy, I never heard of Andrew Jackson Higgins, you know, and then after the Navy, I get into history.
Stephen Ambrose fixed that, I guess. All righty. Well, that's great.
Okay.
Good stuff, man.
All right,
That's
good.
exactly what I wanted.